Mathcore. It's the genre you put on to scare your parents away. It's intense and chaotic, yet calculated. It's complicated and technical and jazzy, and obviously the genre comes from a blending of hardcore and punk and various forms of metal. But what if I tell you that it's also intrinsically linked to post-hardcore? So nowadays, post-hardcore is basically treated as scene kid era initially at the drive-in influenced bands like Pierce the Veil that didn't quite neatly fit into like metalcore or pop punk / emo pop, as well as like bands that just remind us of Fugazi. The real meaning of the term isn't a particular sound. The idea seems to be more that you could see the section of less conventional, artsier hardcore punk bands right at its inception, sometimes influenced by post-punk and art punk and its sister genre noise rock. These would then either influence or be the precursor to various unconventional styles of hardcore to come. Many of these bands experiment to the point that you get bands that ended up sounding like indie alternative rock. Then they'd have those genres be influenced by them and vice versa. It's not too dissimilar from how we got like artsy punk music in the early punk rock days to alternative rock and indie rock. So why did journalists start making this distinction? I assume it's because there was this idea that real, cool, totally legit hardcore / punk music had to be the same straightforward mashing of the same few power chords, aggressively yelling into a microphone by people who can't play, while claiming to be the only one in true art and having an excuse to aggressively bump into each other and pick fights until the cops were like, hey, you don't have a license, so thank God I have an excuse to make you stop. I assume some of these hardcore kids were more afraid of being called post-punk or, God forbid, progressive rock. That any distinction would probably either only come from them shitting on something different, like emo-core, or from like journalists making an obvious elephant in the room distinction nobody was willing to acknowledge. So in this sense, why should we exclude metalcore? Mathcore definitely is the artsy, unconventional, experimental, alternative side of metalcore. And metalcore? Well, as if hardcore kids were making a distinction at first to begin with. Listen to early Converge, Integrity, Roar Shock, or however you pronounce that, Earth Crisis, Ringworm, Overcast, and tell me that these chugging guitar riffs, more distorted yelling, and more complex songs are a complete coincidence. Even to this day, any regular hardcore from the lineage of Madball and like has metal influences. Does Marauder sound like fucking Minor Threat? I mean, we did have to cross over thrash movement prior, which, let's be real, was just punk / hardcore folk trying to play thrash metal, and thrash metal bands trying to sound worse. I'm just saying that was more of a cultural movement, bringing that always fighting brother and sister who secretly hated each other precisely because they were so similar together. Sound-wise, it wasn't that different. Like, it wasn't that different. I mean, thrash metal already had some of its more raw, fast, aggressive influences from punk / hardcore anyway. I mean, thrash used to be a term to refer to just plain old hardcore, or later on fastcore. And do you really think they'd have sounded the same if it wasn't for UK street punk or like anarcho-punk DB type bands like GBH or Discharge? Or hardcore and punk like Bad Brains and Black Flag or The Misfits? Have you heard early heavy metal? Those guys made you fucking know they could sing like a fucking angel. Wait, I digressed hard there. Where was I? Okay. So these hardcore bands were now properly mixing these thrash metal influences into a new sound. Not with the fastcore sound of a lot of the early hardcore, including that of New York. It was more that New York wants to mosh a bit too much, slower, heavy hardcore kind of New York hardcore. Yeah, sorry. That's why metalcore is so much slower than crossover. Anyway, metalcore is just considered a type of hardcore, and when it comes to post-hardcore, it's not like only bands rooting in regular old 80s hardcore punk. can be post-hardcore. Neurosis came from a crust punk album. Their second album is post-hardcore. Hell, their third is pretty much too, but yeah, I went there. Shudder to think it have their roots in melodic hardcore, though yes, melodic hardcore has been around since the genre's inception, and they didn't really make a distinction there at first either. It kind of became something later on, so. Bands like Orange 9mm, Refused, Die 116, etc. came from that slightly metallic, heavy New York hardcore sound. Similarly, the whole transition towards modern post-hardcore and with bands like Thrice and Glassjaw and yes, Deftones had metal influences. And the modern steam-style post-hardcore to follow sure ran with that. It's also more closely tied to metalcore and emo pop than it is to traditional hardcore, yet everyone calls that post-hardcore. And the Japanese post-hardcore band Eastern Youth, they come from fucking Oi, so don't come at me there. And before people are like, oh, but Oi is not hardcore, it's just punk rock. Well, guess what? Early hardcore was essentially the next wave of US punk rock. The UK didn't have it at first, and their bands also went a little harder, like, regardless of its influence. Plenty of bands didn't go any harder at all in either. It was as much a cultural thing as anything. So why exclude mathcore bands there? Just because they have a metalcore sound instead of a hardcore sound? I could see that for some bands, like metalcore was, well, initially the same scene, branched out and got more sonically and genetically distant over time, but at the very least, plenty of these early mathcore bands aren't. And in general, I'd say, ironically enough, often mathcore just sounds more like early metalcore than whatever new metal, genty, melodic death metal thing they call metalcore now. So let's look at some mathcore pioneers and prototypes. Dead Guy. Let me look that up. Lollipop Magazine. Interview with the drummer, Dave Rosenberg. Who are your musical influences? We all grew up pretty metal. Jim even has long hair. I saw Kiss when I was 7, and it just elevated from there until I became out of control. Some of our musical influences are Black Flag, Black Sabbath, Unsane, Today's Today, Misfits, Voivod, Slayer, just to name a few. Okay, metal bands are in there for sure, but there's also Black Flag. Sure, they played Discount Black Sabbath for a while, but they must have also heard their punk aspects. Unsane is considered noise rock style post-hardcore nowadays. Misfits is a pop-punk, hardcore. Sorry, I just find it funny, okay? It's a hardcore / punk rock band that later also had some metal influences. Today's Today is a weird mix of everything. It was definitely part of the harder, sludgy noise rock style post-hardcore sphere. Now, yes, I know. Some artists citing an influence somewhere doesn't mean that much. Artists are influenced by the most random shit you'd ever, never consider. But my point is that they were aware of these artists, and you can hear their lineage, okay? Now to my mom, the Dazzling Killmen were one development further from creating the perfect music to assault her eardrums with awful chaos and screaming. However, despite so unknown, they were that your favorite musician knows them or is unknowingly influenced by them kind of band. They came from the harsher side of mathy noise rock style post-hardcore, not too dissimilar from Craw, Today is Today, or later Colossamite, which is related to the Dazzling Killmen, or later on a band like Brass Knuckles for Tough Guys. What a name. Or Big N. I totally forgot Big N. Big N is amazing. Go listen to Big N. Anywho, these two bands, Craw and Dazzling Killmen, were both ahead of the game. Essentially, it's what happens when folks are both heavily influenced by hardcore, as well as jazz and experimental avant-garde or proggy rock music. It's no wonder that they influenced a bunch of early metalcore bands. Let me see here. their Wikipedia page sources. I guess we actually have to click the sources because sadly my lazy ass can't trust this damn site looking at that metal myth show on Loudwire. Oh, the Skinny has an interview with lead guitarist Ben Weidman of Dillinger Escape Plan. How convenient for me. And oh, what does it say? It lists 10 major influences on his guitar playing. The Dazzling Killman, Fugazi, Today is the Day, Neurosis, Dead Guy, and the non-post-hardcore influences make total sense. Mahavishnu Orchestra is jazz rock. Alice in Chains is very metallic, yet not in a typical way. King Crimson has the prog. Radiohead has artsy rock music. And Soundgarden's there too. Next up, Wikipedia's Dazzling Killman page has metal news on archive.org with let's just say less from Coalesce. It's in my nemesis language, German, but it's very similar to Dutch, so seit viele Bands berufen, I don't know how to pronounce this, berufen sich auf euch, wenn es ihre Einflüsse geht. Wie fühlt sich dann an? Bedeutet dir das etwas? Und welche Bands haben dich inspiriert? Germans are going to have a field day with this. I don't remember anything from German class. Von Bands beeinflusst wurden, die es nie wirklich geschafft haben, aus dem Underground auszubrechen. Dazzling Killman, Carl Pappy, Ritual Device, Ed Hall, Slackjaw, Germbox, und so weiter. Oh hey, Carl Pappy, that's a post-hardcore New York hardcore band. Ed Hall and Ritual Device are noise rock. You know, that post-punk sister genre. Post-hardcore is super influenced by both genres from the more alternative sphere. Not sure which Slackjaw they mean. And Germbox is a post-hardcore style noise rock band, as far as I can gather. Also, have I told you that Nathan seems to be in the casket lottery? Like both Nathans? That's post-hardcore. Alright, another one. Knutz on Core and Co. Drummer Roderick Minier. Is that pesky language French? Une fois n'est pas coutume, peux-tu nous présenter le groupe? En commun à l'époque, on avait le goût des groupes uniques qui transcendent les genres. Neurosis, Today's the Day, Zenny Geneva, Ice and Water, Dazzling Killman, Swans, and Melvins. Okay, so Melvins are sludge metal, a mix of hardcore and doom metal. Today's the Day is on here again, Neurosis again, and yay, the Dazzling Killman. You're on such a streak today, buddy. I believe in you. Zenny Geneva, I don't know how to pronounce that. Seems to be from that punk/hardcore scene, which always had its ties to noise rock and avant-garde in Japan. It's noisy, it's sludgy, it makes sense. Ice and Water is metal. On Maelstrom magazine, especially when I listen to Challenger, I'm reminded of Dazzling Killman, except much harder and heavier. Were you indeed influenced by this band? I can only give you my answer, but yes. It's true that, it says DK. I wanted to say Dead Kennedys. Dazzling Killman has been a great influence. It certainly affected my perspective on rhythm and dynamics, and even my playing along with bands like Helmet, Melvins, Don Caballero, Rush, The Police, Genesis, King Crimson, Meshuggah, Today's the Day, Dead Guy, and so on. I could name 1,000, yeah. Dazzling Killman used to have the complex, fucked up time signatures, the discordance, and the weird vibe. It's only insane and unpredictable. Same with Colossamine and Sickbay, the other bands that a couple Dazzling Killman members did after they broke up. Helmet is metallic post-hardcore, Don Caballero was noise rock style post-hardcore, Today's the Day is there, Prog is on there, some metal bands. The Police came from that artsy post-punky new wave sphere. It all makes sense. On to a more modern band, Ken Mode on MetalRiot.com with Jesse Matthewson. Jesse, when I got to chat with you in Brooklyn, I mentioned some bands I thought could I thought I could detect in your sound. Time in Malta, Teens, Today is Today, and others came up. But you also really are doing your own thing. Could you talk a bit about your influences in Can Mode? But also, you really are your own band at the same time. Like we talked about, we've always been drawn to a number of different areas, from noise rock to hardcore to the odd metal tidbit. I was excited when you mentioned Time in Malta. So few people remember that band. I remember that band, by the way. And they were one of the many great bands from the previous label, Escape Artist Records, who was also once home to ISIS, Anodyne, Keel Hall, Can Mode, and The Dream is Dead, Under Pressure, Burn It Down, Collapser, Blunderbuss, etc. There's a bunch of like sludge metal, metalcore, noise rock kind of bands listed there. Anyway, bands that have always been at the core of our sound include the Melvins, Dazzling Killman, Today is the Day, Drive Like Jehu, Kittens. I don't know what Kittens is. Wait, what? The Jesus Lizard, Zenny Jivo, Unsane, Tad, Black Flag, Bat Brains, etc. We can't help but run through a modern filter a lot of our contemporaries, which have been around for 13 and a half years. It means we've had a fair number of those. There's a lot of post-hardcore in there. Unsane, Dazzling Killman, Drive Like Jehu, Jesus Lizard, Time in Malta, and hardcore like Black Flag or Bat Brains, and hybrids like Taint. Let's dig a little for Converge, www.wrir.org. Tonight from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. I'll only play music picked by the guitarist of Converge, Kurt Ballou, plus offer a little insight as to how some of those puzzle pieces fit into their band's history. There are some tracks I think people are expecting to hear, like Rorschach or Sick of It All, but traditional Appalachian folk song was played by a Gothic Americana band. Who knew that was even a genre? I don't think so. There's a lot here, but Kurt digs plenty of emo core-cell post-hardcore. It's just Silside, Universal Order of Armageddon, Lincoln, Rise of Spring, Moss Icon, and Hoover. Other post-hardcore, like Drive Like Jehu, The Jesus Lizard, and Quicksand. Post-punk / noise rock, again, something post-hardcore is influenced by, such as The Birthday Party and Echo and the Bunnymen. Alt and indie rock, like Failure and the Pixies. They themselves are a little bit post-hardcore influenced. Metal, like Slayer, Godflesh, Entombed, Cryptopsy, Black Sabbath, and Pantera. Traditional hardcore / punk, like Cherry Skits, This, Black Flag, and Bat Brains, Slapshot, and Infest. New York hardcore like Born Against, Sick of It All. Crossover thrash like Chromax. Metalcore like Starkweather or Rorschach. Some non-punk / metal artists like 16 Horsepower, The Beatles, and Neil Young were on there as well. Now, obviously, it doesn't really let us know when they listen to these bands. However, they make sense. Even if we look at Converge themselves, you'll see their early stuff has a lot of emo core aspects to them. In their later What We Love We Leave Behind, it also has elements of screamo. So I could go on. I could tell you the basis of Botch wasn't These Arms Are Snakes, but we don't even really have to go on that. What we have here is a form of metallic hardcore that took in more influences from more alternative, proggy, and experimental spheres and outside genres, plenty of which had straight-up post-hardcore influences and went into more experimental, unconventional, artsy directions in general. What more can I say? It's not like genres are like these super clear things. They're just general categories and cultural movements. Why suddenly completely separate these two? And I know, some of you will be like, but it sounds too intense, and it sounds too extreme. It's so hardcore. Well, so does Screamo, and Screamo, initially also having no distinction, was just a harsher side of emo-core. And emo-core really was just a type of post-hardcore. It came to be the same way Husker Du came to be, or Fugazi, or Drive Like Jehu. And while the extremity wasn't always what used to make something hardcore anyway, some bands were just really tame punk rock. And don't get me started on atmospheric sludge metal. It's not as inherent, but it is a factor. There are some links to post-hardcore and atmospheric sludge as well. ISIS has cited Craw. I could see it. And what about the aforementioned Neurosis? Or what about Keel Hall? It's sludgy, it's metalcore, it's post-hardcore. You get the picture. My point is that mathcore and post-hardcore, these genres are intrinsically linked. Are you still not convinced? Well, maybe I'm full of shit, and we can argue like petty little nerds in the comments. That's my favorite hobby. Come on, fight me. And they'll have like a drink and laugh about it. See her out. And remember, there's no need not to try as long as you can DIY.